podcast listeners, if you hear my voice right now, I need you to do something for me. I want you to take out your phone or on your computer, go to Apple Podcasts, search for Ask Your Oldhead podcast. You'll see my logo, my little picture, my little image there. Find the show. Please rate and write a review. It's a small thing, but it helps others find this work and find what I'm doing here. And it really, really matters, as small as that may seem. So if you can please do that before we get into the show, I would much appreciate it. Thank you for listening. Let's get into it. Peace. I'm Majestic.
My brother, Justice Rajee.
Man, so I think we said in the last recording that we would talk about this today, and if we didn't, then surprise everybody. But it's been all the rage that this is the 50th anniversary of hip hop, or folks have decided that this is the 50th anniversary of hip hop, and apparently have decided that officially that there's a date and there's a party and a flyer. And so there's been events. I don't think I talked about it on in any of our conversations, but when I was at the National Urban League Conference in Houston, like the Urban League Live night was the theme of 50 years of hip hop, and it was interesting, to say the least. So I guess I would say from a couple of angles, I'm having a weird time with this whole thing. As I guess I would say, as I like to say, as a retired rapper, a person that made hip hop. We made hip hop for over a decade, I'd say, or approximately, more or less, and had a footprint. And as a person who has been listening to hip hop since it was started being on, being like, yeah, that's that rap. Y'all listen to that rap music, or the hip hop, or the hippie, in the jokes of the late '80s, the comedians that used to bang on it, and the comedians that didn't bang on it, and the weird, all the movies of the '80s, the everything that has happened. I guess I would say in terms of like hip hop as a music and culture, and a creative space that wasn't just about music. It was about dance. It was about art. It was about political activism and protest. Or I guess you could even I think you could wager. I think you could say maybe even performance art at times, right? I mean, we wouldn't call it that because we wouldn't. Ain't nobody get no grants in the '80s. So at least I don't know nobody that got a grant or got sold their record for a whole lot of money because they said it was performance art. But yeah, so I don't know. I guess I know you have some things that you want to say or have some thoughts. So I guess how is this whole thing? How's this whole experience striking you right now?
Oh man, it strikes me like I know why we think, even though recently we now know about the history or origin of jazz, I know why a lot of people in our communities think jazz is for white people. I know why now people think rock and roll is for white people. And I say that because I think once we start to chronicle these things, we're going to do it with a timestamp. We're going to do it at a timestamp of the time we're seeing it, talking about something that happened before. So when jazz is looked at as like, oh, this virtuoso art, and this, that, and the third, which it is 1,000%, it is the American classical music. It has become a global classical music. But when you describe it like that, what happens is there's a context for people that forget that this was created in literally the whorehouses of New Orleans.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
Right. And this was music that talked about sex and hot and cool jazz with different connections and relationships to sex.
Mm-hmm.
So I'm sharing that to say that, but now we get to a place, and I'm going to talk about the whole MCM movement in a minute, but like we get to a place where we perceive jazz as something different. We would perceive rock and roll as something different because of the role of the Beatles or the role of the Rolling Stones, right? We forget about the black singers, and we'll do the whole Chuck Berry was rock and roll. We created it, but again, we divorce it from its context. So I say those things to say I feel like with this like August 11th, 1973, like okay, is that when someone said the hip, the hop, the hippity hop? Like, what makes it the beginning of the music? Like, because it was a
Mhm.
party with a DJ,
I mean, because it was Cool Herc's. I
right?
mean,
Because it was Cool Herc Sisters party. Like, I mean, what about all these black men that been rapping and saying stuff that rapped over beats? If that was the case, and I'm not trying to do the whole, well, brother, the Watts Prophets and the Last Poets and Gil Scott Heron was doing hip hop. I'm not trying to. I'm not that guy today. So I'm not that guy, but I am saying what makes that the thing, right?
mhm.
Okay, yes, we're talking about the Bronx, but are we divorcing the reality of the Bronx from the beginning of hip hop? Are we divorcing Cool Herc and his experience in relationship to reggae and ska and all the things that he heard in the the big systems, or is it just like, and it's American exceptionalism shit? Something was created in the ghettos of New York that had no relationship to nothing else. Dum dum dum. Like, is that is that authentic? Is that rigorous? Like for
Yeah.
real, and making sure that there's some historical and social and political context to it. You've heard me carp about this in the past too. I get we did the Bronx thing, and it's a better narrative to talk about the Bronx and then the related elements of Zulu and Zulu Nation stopping the Savage Skulls and getting rid of gang violence, like to do this whole peace, love, and harmony thing, right?
Hmm. Hmm.
Because we want this to be pure and nice as a form of expression. Very again, like you think of jazz, you think it's like some kid playing like Spike Lee's dad forcing them to play, watching
Right.
Mo Better Blues or something. Like, is that how it started though? Like, you know what I mean? Like, and in this we also, and I'll stop here. We cut out Harlem, and I've always had this like thing that like we've cut out Harlem in the role of DJ Hollywood and the other brothers from Harlem who were talking over the records, and rapping over the records because that reflects flashy post disco making money.
Hmm. Hmm.
And it doesn't fit into this peace, love, and justice narrative of hip hop,
Mm.
which I think is just becoming a sanitized version. Going looping back, I think we're creating this very sanitized version
Right.
of
Right.
the music that we all heard and had and was impacted by. That's point. Yeah. Well, I got more, but
Yeah,
that's point.
yeah, yeah. So, like, the first thing that strikes me about it, right, is, you know, and I think I said this to you, I think I said this in like, kind of like a couple years ago. And look, I know I've said it on here, so I'll say it again. But going to, basically with a charitable event, like a kind of closed door charitable fundraiser event. Um, and the music of choice was all of the hip hop songs of the 93 to 94, 95, part 93, 95 range, 96 maybe, that when we were listening to that music when it was new, it would not be played on the radio. But everyone in there, including some people, at least financially well-heeled folks, were just like, "Oh yeah, like just jamming and like raising money for the thing we was raising money for." And it being like, "Wow, hip hop won! Like we've conquered the world." Because this group, if the folks who would have had this standing, this would not have been their music of choice at that time. Now maybe it would have been I don't know, probably a similar, the concept of the music that is not in favor of one age that is then the music of of folks who
Right.
matriculate class wise or whatever have you. So that being said, the thing that strikes me interesting about this is almost like it feels very like somebody decided they wanted to do an activity that sounded like a cool thing to do. But all of the overall kind of or at least it's unclear to me that the overall substantial legwork and like significance of like, well, if this is really us all doing acknowledging 50 years of the music, you know what I'm saying? If we say like, yeah, like 73-ish roughly is when the things that we would consider hip hop. Again, and then we're only talking about the music because I'm not seeing at least like, nobody doing like a breakdance traveling revival and like that's doing breakdancing and then like teaching break dancing at different dance schools
but hold on. Can I say something there too? Can I
yeah.
And it's also the thing of this originalism. There have been varying forms of hip hop dance since breakdancing,
right,
and since popping and locking, right? Like,
yep.
Yes, it's a beautiful idea that you take popping and locking that came from L.A. and you take breakdancing that was being done in the Bronx, right? Like, that is great. But the Cabbage Patch was hip hop dance.
Yep.
The WAP was hip hop dancing. Guess what? The Bankhead Bounce, it was hip hop dancing. And the varying things from a performance level that evolved from the art, right? So that's the thing. If we be like, okay, what about the dance? But then our vantage point of the dance is breakdancing. Right? The dancing, crumping. Listen, it is the dancing of like crumping and that kind of dance lasted longer, frankly, than breakdancing and popping and locking. It lasted longer.
Yeah.
Even if you want to say, okay, you watch what's happening, if you said popping and locking went from 1977 to 1985, 86, I'd give you that, right? I know by 1986, we picked up that cardboard, wasn't doing that no more.
Yeah. By the time, there wasn't nobody taking over the lunchroom, even though we had linoleum in 87 and 88. You know what I'm saying? When it was like, nah, man,
you listening to the music. And by that point, again, besides hip hop dances, but the hip hop dances is when you came in doing the Roger Rabbit.
Yep.
Right? Like that was hip hop dance. Again, the Bankhead Bounce coming out in 95. That's hip hop dance. When Muggs was doing that Leaders of the New School, one arm out, one arm back, that like,
I don't know what the name of that dance is, but I know what
that was all hip hop dance. And again, in the variations of things that have evolved since then. So again, this is even that idea, right? Of that, or versus being like a hip hop DJ. And like, okay, all right, so the DJing is the foundation. So okay, now you go get somebody that's going to do the Transformer scratch like Jazzy Jeff. Again, Philly love. It's great to bring in Jazzy Jeff to talk about the scratch, right? But most of us don't spend time listening to music with a whole bunch of scratch, rapping and scratching.
Well, if you've been to Jeff's one of his like joints when he DJs, which I would highly recommend if you've never gone. It's not like he taking you back to 1988. Like it's not 2 hours of the brand new funk. Like he be doing all kinds of wild DJ like blends and drops and like it's a whole cavalcade of creative things that are not.
But and that's all I'm saying. That's my point. Like it's like, okay, hip hop DJing could be D Nice and how he did Club Quarantine, but he's playing other music, right? Like so again, it's like we're chronicling it, we're codifying it in ways that just can seem limiting going forward. Right? That again, our children, like as this kind of weird, strange things happening where people actually be like, that's trap music. Like it's some form of like other music. Like it's not a variation of hip hop. It's its own thing called trap music.
It's trap or drill.
No, I'm not talking about drill. I'm talking about like track, like with the kind of beats and the whole
Oh, okay,
future,
yeah,
depressed emo, which is I think a conversation for another time. But like, you know, oh, okay, that's trap. Okay, so what is that not hip hop no more? Like, and so at what point do our children's children start being like, yeah, listen to trap music? They're like, oh, it was kind of hip hop, but it wasn't hip hop no more. And they would say, well, what's hip hop? Hip hop is defined as the five elements: MCing, b-boying, DJing, and I will put this in here too. We're not having any conversation about not just graffiti, but then the conversation about what has become of artistry, right?
mm-hmm.
Of visual artistry.
Yeah, yeah.
Again, shout out to Cornbread. Cornbread was a vandalist. He was a vandal, man. Like
He wrote his
Cornbread
name
was
on
a
a plane.
vandal, man. He rode on a plane, man. He rode on an
Wow,
elephant at the
dude.
Philadelphia Zoo.
He's a wild dude. How you gonna
Like,
put your name on a plane?
yeah, like Cornbread was here. Listen, right? So it started with vandalism. Whether you look at him, Tacky, 183, like all these guys had this very clear origin story of like it's a part of vandalism, in which I think again we'll try to create this to something. Oh no, man, they started as vandals because it has a social and political timestamp.
Yeah,
And when you divorce it from the social and political timestamp, you're making it Disney World.
yeah. I mean, and definitely, I think the other piece I was going to like with this, like, if this is the if those who I guess would be considered, I don't know, appropriate to ground or to center or to whatever have you, like if we're like, yeah, we are officially commemorating the art, you know what I'm saying, and everything that goes with it is like everything that gets left out when you commemorate it then becomes like for some people, then that stuff wasn't a part of it. You know what I'm saying? Like the
Absolutely.
you know what I'm saying? Like if there's not um the academic, as much as, the construct of the concept of like, the academia can be, challenging or off-putting, I think sometimes to people. The thing of someone making like, I'm going to make a bibliography of all of where you can find reference material for every of I'm just going to do everything from 80 to 85 that we would maybe categorize as hip hop, as either music, any of the elements, right? Like that would be a heavy job of somebody trying to like, I'm gonna try to like find, tapes and flyers, events that, around the country that people would construe now as like that, but that was like a hip hop thing. Photographs, artists, media articles, scholarly works from that age that, if you even look at, you want to go read, the editions of Milana Karenga's Black Studies, and it's section on hip hop, which doesn't age very well, but because he was definitely critical of the hip hop age, and at least the edition I still got. I'm saying like this becomes a very, maybe you don't know. I shouldn't say I should say I take it like you. If BET does I don't ever catch any of those awards, but they did the 50 years of hip hop kind of
Yeah.
stage show, and people watched it, and some people dug it a lot. I tried to watch it. I'll get back around to try and watch it again. But then that becomes the thing that is there, right? So there was a concert. I think it was yesterday, right? Wasn't it a thing this weekend?
Yeah, in Yankee Stadium.
Yankee Stadium, right? So, on one hand, if you get everything you get in there, I mean, I guess it doesn't have to be the only show, but you run the risk of like, I don't know. I guess there's a part of it that's like, I feel like, just this old man, old curmudgeon that's like, humbug. You don't need to do no 50 years of hip hop show. Just, but then it's like, if you're going to do it, like, if it can't miss no beats. Like, it can't miss any these steps,
Well,
and like who's
that's the
coming, and
thing.
like who gets to pick, and like does it travel around the country? Does it
Well,
like
I think that's LL's thing. I think to his credit, I think LL tried to leverage his thing and say that he was going to kind of try to do more of a, more of a holistic one. And I
mm,
think obviously with having Questlove and Black Thought and, having Jazzy Jeff and Z Trip, like, I think they're going to try to be a little more all inclusive of what that means. But there's always winners and losers. And I want to be thoughtful that, I'm not trying to make the perfect the enemy of the good. And there are going to be winners and losers. And I think, frankly, everything except rap has been the loser in its 50 years. In this whole conversation,
yeah.
I think hip hop dance, which frankly is black and brown dance, I think visual arts. If you have a Basquiat in your house, or you have a Basquiat anything, or you have a Keith Haring in your house, or almost any artist after a certain time, even if they were classically trained, if you have a Hebrew Brantley in your house, if you have this is art derived and influenced by hip hop.
Mm,
That conversation itself becomes another dialogue when Messiah wears a Keith Haring shirt and then we take it back to the crack as whack wall he did in '86 in Harlem.
mm-hmm.
We start then our understanding of art becomes different. Now we're talking about another element of the global phenomenon. And this is part of this versus the one you could commodify the most.
Mm.
Rap was the one you could commodify. So that's why we're seeing the conversation about commodification. It is. This is not happening outside of commodification, and like nothing happens outside capitalism in America. But like this is not happening outside of the idea of like, oh, okay, we could sell this, we could do tours, we can have journalists write something, we can have this, do this, we can put a sneaker out.
Mm-hmm.
We're not having the MoMA's not doing 50 years of hip hop art. I mean, actually, they may be them or Studio Museum of Harlem might be some of the ones that may do that. But like, we're not seeing that. We're not talking about, like we talked about with Dilla, his influence on hip hop, which then influenced any jazz artist that came of age post Dilla's death,
Mm-hmm.
and some before he died. You listen to their drums, they are doing what Dilla did. I would argue sometimes you hear more influence from Dilla in jazz than you hear in hip hop.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. Yeah.
Yusef Days, obviously Robert Glasper. When you think about all these different artists from across the world, there's an Australian group, a Hiatus Coyote. I think I don't want to mispronounce their names, but like,
yeah, I listen to them. I'm familiar.
They they learned at the altar of Jay Dilla, right? Like, and so again, but if we're talking, if all it's going to be is here's the song from 1988, here's the song from 1989, here's the song from this, here's the song from 2004. Listen to this. Look how far hip hop has come, y'all. But it's only the rap, and and let me say this: if you ask a lot of people, and you say, tell me the jazz artists that are important. A lot of people are going to say one of the three names: Miles Davis, John Coltrane, or Thelonious Monk. Because at some point that became the canon, right? They got the posters, right? Columbia Records puts out Miles Davis rehashes, and John Cole, like Impulse Records puts out new Coltrane's. Like, I don't know where this stash they keep finding the Coltrane records. Monk got a beer, right? Like, as he deserves. But my point is, like, that's who you start to think about. So you're not talking about Cecil Taylor. You're not talking about Charlie Parker. You're not talking about Dizzy Gillespie, Duke Ellington, right?
Yeah. Clark Terry.
Clark Terry. You're not talking about Sidney Bechet and the
Lionel
actual
Hampton.
guys that did it in the in the whorehouses, right?
Right.
Like in the like that's how we define it. Like reggae. Who's reggae? Bob Marley, right?
Right.
And so what we're doing is hip hop. What we think about? Hip hop hooray,
Biggie,
right?
Tupac.
Biggie or Run DMC.
Right.
Like, okay, like Rakim, PDP, NWA, right? Like, unless you're doing a very localized context, you're just hearing about these artists that all came out during a time that people our age and a little bit older came of age. And I argue that people of our age, a little bit older, are the people who developed the industries of hip hop. And
Mhm.
so, therefore, their lens on the music is the lens.
Yeah. Yeah. And it's the thing, I guess it also rubs against me, or like I don't know if we'll ever listen to music that way again. Because like the way they listen to hear new songs and artists today, it doesn't work like that, right? Um, due to the way that I guess quite frankly the market to access music has changed, right? And maybe that even speaks to like, so like we both know several artists. I mean, I would say like Kane, Big Daddy Kane, who and what's the other one that like tour pretty extensively. Like they go around the country like doing rocket
In
shows
the world,
in the
absolutely.
world. Like it's still 89. You know what I'm saying? Um, because that's the one people want to see it, but also that's the way that in the way a lot of musicians historically in America have been able to make money. You travel around where people can hear you play your music because you couldn't depend on selling lots and lots of records or whatever object, that, now they're files or whatever. Um, and even something like Jazz is Dead, which is sort of built this, world of bringing of resurfacing, I would say, I guess maybe for some people, jazz music, but that has this blend of like there's touring and performing live, and then there's also vinyl and records you could buy, but you can also listen to it online. But at least it seems like to me that they make their money, they make it work because they travel and people can come to hear the music, right?
Right.
And the so again, that like as you just stated, that lens of our age, that like something has to be sold and like it comes out, is like a part of how we really experienced hip hop in our formative years, where the people that are like 10 years older than us for sure, they may have, depending on where they was at, they may have went to some event or to a party or to a thing where they was like, oh,
Right.
that's the hip hop thing, or they like got a
Right.
tape,
It was
and
happening. Right.
right, it was happening. So they sometimes look at our hip hop a little different because to them, I don't know if it's to the way that maybe we would feel. We sometimes our folks may feel that like trap, as you mentioned earlier, or something else. These different genres um, are almost not at any part of this other thing, but it does definitely. When I've engaged with folks that are at that different age range and experience, their orientation to like where does this fit in the larger culture is different. The other like thought though I had with that was like, how does this serve our memory, right? Like, are we going to, you know, lose the thread of like all these other like the social context stuff that was happening that made what happened with hip hop and made it spread, where not only in the Bronx were folks experiencing, you didn't have music in schools, you didn't have access to stuff post, deindustrializing America, first fired, economic collapse in black communities, black and brown communities, and other people too, but us especially, that you had this like youth, especially with young people, this like need, quite frankly, to party, like to go and like dance hard. You know what I'm saying? Like we used to dance. Like we was dancing. Like you go to the party, even if you wasn't into dancing, you might go stand over there. But you know, like the context of when you went to a hip hop, like it wasn't there to watch, to look at the DJ and the MC rapping. People was dancing. You know what I mean? Then the other
it was an activity in and of itself.
right. That event was, and then that the other things that I think you could tie in, even though they're their own thing from the bounce, was it like New Orleans, what they're doing in New Orleans, bounce music, what's the name in Florida,
Miami
Chicago, all the different types of house music that started to develop in the 80s from, Chicago to Baltimore. You know what I mean? And even that, a lot of these cities that was more in the house dancing than anything that we would call that, but we at the time would have distinguished from hip hop, but it is connected. You know what I'm saying? In that, like, the same drum machines and turntables and stuff people was making, hip hop, large professors over there making all the beats that you ever liked was using, other people were using to make other types of music.
Well, God, that's the other thing about this. And I had to say it like this. If we're not careful, we're going to start divorcing hip hop from Black people's experience. Now, obviously, when we say Black and brown, there is a very New York element to why we say Black and brown.
Mm-hmm.
And I think we should just be open and honest about that, right? Like the proximity of Black folks and Puerto Ricans, Cubans, like in the Bronx, right? Particularly.
Right. It was all together.
Right. Like that's a thing. But now when it goes to other places, when it goes to LA, you don't get Mexican rappers for a while.
Right.
Right? Like it's not like one of them things where they picked it up just the same way. And even to your point about like it's a thing you're doing when you're calling it an art, but you're separating it from the thing that people were actually practicing it. And like to you now, like, okay, so when do you practice this? Like, is it when I put my headphones on and I go to run? Or when I'm in a car?
Mm-hmm.
Like, where do you practice listening to this thing? And again, at what point is it not separate from this is the experience people are having? Or when someone okay, this is a perfect example. When Hurry Love Bug goes down to DC, when everybody from New York going to Howard and they hear this whole other music.
Mm-hmm.
That ain't hip hop.
Right.
Ain't no hip hop, and it ain't hip hop. That dudes in DC is shouting out Cruise Uptown, Cruise in Southside, Cruise in Northeast, and all this kind of stuff, right? Then they take it back and make it with a beat. And now it's hip hop. Now it's your thing with EU.
Right.
So now this is hip hop, right? Because somebody rapped over it. It's a takeoff. When the Beastie Boys, when listen, and for everybody that's listening to this, people must note when you hear early 80s hip hop, you're always going to hear some variation of go-go because New York always took from people and never gave credit to exactly what it was.
Mm-hmm.
They went to other cities and took from it, especially DC, and then went back and acted like they didn't take from them.
It's like we just came up with this idea.
We just came up with this idea of all this goddamn syncopation and these goddamn 4 drums that somebody's playing the congas. Those niggas wasn't playing no congas in New York. Sick of this shit, man. God, it is indicative to me of like what we're missing when someone goes and does that, or when Jungle Brothers listen to it today. Girl, they did Our House You.
Mm-hmm.
They rapped and almost like sang and harmonized over a house beat.
Yep. And it was definitely like a song you listened to at a party. Like that wasn't like a,
right. That wasn't at your house.
That wasn't at your house song. Like unless you was getting dressed to go to the party, or Girl Our House You was like a year or two older for me to really be going to parties. But I was thinking about it. Like I see my brother getting
Right,
ready to
right. You
go to
was
go to a
watching other
party.
people go out there.
Other
Yeah,
people going
you
to
know
a party.
them songs is like when you watch other people go to a party. You
Like,
like,
oh, they
damn,
going to a party. They about to go.
they
Oh,
gonna play this.
they gonna
I'm
play
gonna
that.
get to that.
That's the jam. That's what I heard. I heard they go crazy when you play this. You know what I'm saying, or whatever. You know, as the young people, you know, would maybe paraphrase and use other language, like and so it's like, and I understand for those who might be listening, like, well, just how you expect somebody to tell all that story in the midst of, like, you know, trying to get you know, I don't know, trying to get Ice-T to on stage with so and so. Like, so like we can feel like we seeing the hits again. Like, that's cool, but I don't know. It just feels like dangerous waters to me. Yeah, you know what I mean? Like the aftermath is that we, you know, I mean, I guess I would say it speaks to a couple itches of mine. One, I think that there is a void of storytelling from our age about what we've experienced in our age. And maybe there's like a whole bunch of dope stories and I ain't read them, but I even feel like sometimes when I read different people's fiction, it's not fictionalizing. It's not talking about this, you know, this 50 years of hip hop window, at least not to the same degree that the window before, you know. And I think the age of writing is different, so I understand like that is a medium. Like a lot of people who would have been writers started rapping and did other stuff. So we might not, you know, it might be a creative um change that has moved, but like, you know, like you can't talk about hip hop and not talk about Reaganomics. Like you just like you can't be telling me you're having a serious conversation about like why are people doing this? Why are they so frustrated? And then also not talk about like you got to talk about crack and HIV at some point.
You can't talk about hip hop without talking about crack.
Like you got to.
Because when the music changes, right? When the
Right.
music goes from, yo, we know what's going on outside. There's hustlers in here selling a whole bunch of drugs, right? To we're going to talk about what's going on outside. Hip hop had about outside the jungle. I mean, outside of the message, hip hop had about. If you look from '79, if you want to go from recorded music, you want to just context,
Mm-hmm.
right? You want to go from recorded music context. Schoolie D, which you know, Schoolie D was again, you know, shouts out the PSK Parkside. Schoolie D was in the vein of wild Philly motherfuckers. Like, he talking shit. Like,
Mm-hmm.
you know, he talking about what happened with PSK, who they had beef with, right? What his man did. They gonna snort some cocaine. Like, you know what I mean? Like, it was, again, very much like the Watts Prophets and some of the stuff we heard before, right?
Mm-hmm.
Or, well, man, what's the joint? That story. It's a hip hop. I mean, it's like a poetry story
Um.
from the '70s. Sport. I think dude's name was like Sports Delight or something like that.
Mm-hmm.
But like, he was in that vein. He was talking about what was going on. Ice-T heard that and was like, "Oh man, he talking about what's going on in Philly. Let me talk about what's going on here. Battering ram. 6 a.m. They kicking in my door because the LAPD, which we didn't come to learn,
Right.
are harming people and violating their rights. You can't separate the conversation about the change in neighborhoods and the change in cities without having that conversation. Or even when Quick and them say, yo, Portland, just like Compton.
Right.
Because
Editorialized
because
in the
because
moment.
Bloods and Crips is going across the country. Dudes from LA is going across the country to sell drugs.
Like they didn't just come in. They didn't come in pop locking and was like, "Yo, y'all want to dance with us?" Like, like that wasn't the transmission. And I mean, and then it's the context of like, if gangster rap, as at least as it became defined, like West Coast gangster rap was just like gangster to them for no particular reason. It's like no, like it was gangster rapping because like it was a lot of wild. Like there was an economy that was hiring and required a certain behavioral model, and then it was exported because people do drugs, and we have not really kicked that. We haven't solved that as a country, at all.
As a
And
matter of fact, we probably take more drugs than we've ever taken.
right, you know, it is the height of the war on drugs, and the conceptual idea that like we'll beat this by kicking down people's doors and smashing their houses and arresting as many people as we can. And then the social reality of like what crack did in communities, different even from the heroin age of the 70s and the early 70s, and then again even in the inception of hip hop, to not talk about heroin.
Right.
Again, it's like I understand that's not maybe fun at a concert, and that's cool, but like somewhere we got to talk about that part, right? Like you can't. I mean, even our contribution to the fabric of the '90s is as much about our coming of age and growing up and trying to go to school and other thing, but also the murder of Johnny Gamage. And I say murder. Anybody else got a problem with that? Find me and say it to my face. You feel like it wasn't murder.
Uh-oh.
You know what I'm
Uh-oh.
saying?
Uh-oh.
Uh, in the Pittsburgh, the Valley context, but also John, the Rodney King. You know what I'm saying? Like you can't.
Rodney King, Mumia. I mean, you can't
Yeah, the
again.
move. You can't. You got to talk about all that stuff too. Like you got to talk about the decision. The second wave of what became the damn mass incarceration. Like we were experiencing it, and we were not aware that like this was happening. Like other people act now like hey, they didn't see it coming. Like we were no at the time we was like yo they're gonna lock everybody up. Like that's the answer. They're just gonna just lock everyone up that they can lock up. We just lock them up, and maybe things will get better. And we're also gonna kick people. We're gonna accuse people who are poor that they're poor because they're lazy, because they're bad people, not because we don't have actually anywhere in our economy that makes space for them to find a way. Um, don't get me. Look, I'm not going to go
Ain't
on the
no, hey,
justice.
man.
So
Here
I'm not
you
going to get on
go.
the soapbox. I'm gonna leave it alone.
No. I mean, listen. What you're saying is correct. I think, and this is the other thing. Like, by the time we figured out basic income or some variation of it, programmatic, because it's not really basic income because you would give it to everybody.
Mm-hmm.
Right. It's like that. That's the thing. So it's like, well, that's basic income. No, we're segmenting off populations, and we did it during pandemic, so we know that it works. But we're not going to do it because it's not an American fabric to do it.
Yeah.
Like we already did it. We gave everybody that didn't make a certain amount of money a check.
Yeah, and it
to make sure that they was okay.
And it helped people stabilize their reality.
And we knew why we did it.
Yep.
And then we stopped it because we're not. That's not the game we're playing. But anyway.
Yeah. So it's like you gotta.
Here's the biggest thing I want to say about your point that you're bringing up, and I want to put a like square inch element of a square mile dialogue.
Mm-hmm.
The other elephant in the room was when I talk about the relationship between the music and the art and the economic and social systems. And I'm not here. I'm not just talking about black people or black people and brown people in New York. I'm talking about like the small labels who were affiliated with criminal activities, both on the black and white side.
Mm-hmm.
That put out these records because they put out records because they was affiliated with the mob.
Yeah.
When we talk about Steve Rifkin and Loud and everything that Steve Rifkin did, it is on the record that his father was connected with the mob. I'm not casting dispersions on the guy's name.
Hey,
it's on the record that his father was connected with the mob and they had a small record company, and that Steve Rifkin then went and did Loud. And so he gives us all the great stuff we want to hear. It gives us, Twister, which was his first signing. A lot of people forget that.
Mm-hmm.
So, but then it gets us, Wu-Tang, Mobb Deep, Big Pun, the Alcoholics, wherever you want to just, to go on and go on and go on and go on, right? It was connected to the record industry who had a history of making sure black folks didn't get what they deserved. And that goes back to jazz.
Yep.
Nelson George actually does and I think Nelson George is an interesting person. I don't know the context of how he would talk about a lot of the new stuff because I think he's doing other stuff. But I think for me, I follow his Substack, and he talks a lot about like the changes he saw in fashion and the changes he saw that was happening in New York through hip hop in the through line. And then when you're trying to talk about records and getting records and who's getting records to you and how do certain records get out. And when we think about early hip hop, and except for like Curtis Blow, who I think was on Mercury Records, all of the early hip hop we think about until probably around 89 or 90 were on independent labels.
Mm.
Fourth and Broadway, Profile, right? Def Jam got to deal with Columbia because of LL.
Right.
Tommy Boy Records. So we think about all these other people, we'd be like, oh man, these were all independent labels. And most of them never got the money they deserved for those things because of the structure of the music at that time. And then here's the other part, hip hop at 50. Okay, well, let's talk about hip hop at 50 has now effectively created a monoculture of black children, of black people.
Mm-hmm.
There was a time, let's use the DC thing, the Eastern Seaboard thing that we're very comfortable with.
Yeah, yeah.
You go to DC, they are eating foods we don't know about. They're eating chicken wings and mambo sauce. They're wearing slouch socks. They are wearing gray sweatpants, which I didn't learn till later because they all was coming from the federal penitentiary. So they turned the fact that they all had to wear gray sweatpants home because anytime anybody from DC went to jail after they closed Lorton, it was the Fed.
Yeah.
So they all came home with gray sweatpants on. And then we took it and was like, oh, I like them gray sweatpants.
Oh, they're chilling. Oh, they're styling in them gray sweats.
They styling them gray sweatpants and them New Balances. But even that, gray sweatpants, New Balances, it is noted that DC is responsible for the infusion of New Balances into urban culture, black urban culture, right?
Yep.
They had their own style and they had their own musics. You go to Baltimore guys, they had their own women. They had their own music and their own style. They had their Baltimore house music. They kept Air Force Ones alive when no one else did.
Mm-hmm.
Before Philly and before New York. You come to Philly, everybody's clothes is, more tailored. Everybody's clothes is tighter. Slim jeans, Reeboks. There's the glasses, Alpinas, Porsche design sunglasses. There's an entire culture to Philadelphia fashion. You go to Newark. They're different than New York. They listen to house music more than New York does.
Yep. They
have their own culture. You get to New York, they got theirs. Every borough has their own flavor. Brooklyn wears Fila's. Queens wears Adidas. Right? What's the name? Wears Nikes in Harlem. Everybody got their own thing. You keep going to Boston, they wear Adidas. Every place had their own thing. We now have a monoculture of music, of fashion, and everything else. And I am going to say this. It is a monoculture that restricts creativity, fashion-wise, and propagates emotional isolation and death, music-wise.
Strong statement.
Black boys are being taught to be emotionally isolated and emotionally stunted in ways we are not picking up.
Yeah. Yeah.
The music is internal. The music is like, I like ESTG, for example, right? Like the boy from Louisville. I like him. But he raps like he just popped a pill. And all he talks about is to get back. All he talks about is going up on the ops. All like in it is emotionally detached and depressing music. And our boys, him, NBA Youngboy, they are listening to this stuff and they are taking it in. Every kid in America, no matter how hot it is, wants to wear a goddamn ski mask.
Yeah, it's not. I don't get it. It's not healthy.
It's a monoculture. Black people never had a monoculture. Every city, every region had their own creativity.
Yeah, they had their own flavor, they had their own style, and then often, I mean, was impacted by the what the reality of that part of the country. You know what I'm saying? Like they, I mean, one is I'm still fathoming, and I know that a lot of the young people, at least some, wear the hoodies because it makes them feel safe or warm or whatever. However, I'm I don't know. Shoot, it's hot. I can't put a hoodie over my head. When I was a kid, I could put a hoodie over my head in the summertime. I'd be sweating bullets. I just, you can't tell, like, and I understand, and that ain't meaning I guess the like, how is the messaging, right? Like how are how are young people, kind of picking up, what the nature of the world is, right? Because it was a different, and it was the thing that I think I like the thought is a half baked, quarter baked justice thought about even like what we experienced in the 90s, almost like East meets West of like blackness, like crashing into each other in public. You know what I'm saying? And like us sorting out how we felt about each other, which largely we felt fine about each other, at least on the
Right.
street behind closed doors. I know on some in some spaces, there's a very good, if you can find it, Roy Wood story about being on the FAMU's campus when Tupac was killed, and the dudes from New York kind of like celebrating, and all the other people not being happy about that, and a fight ensued. You know what I'm saying? From like the context of this, like who you identified with, right? You know what I'm saying? And who you thought was like your person. You know what I mean? But this modern place we're in is that like, I mean, on its face, people are musicians to be well known to then sell other stuff, like not to
Right.
actually sell music, right? And so then even like the idea, and I was thinking about this, and not even just like who's the last artist or the most recent artist that we would frame from our lens of our time, which wasn't always the best lens of like the conscious rapper. But let's just say like they was making the person that's making music that was talking about something or whatever they was talking about, but they was having fun, but it wasn't necessarily like, emo depressed rap, battle rap or whatever. Of the last, 2 or 3 years. Like, does this artist exist? Right? Is there anyone that has broke through in the context that is not sort of doing this thing where it's like, yeah, but this is what you do because people like that. So you got to make with the beat, and then you go like this, and then you do some stuff with the Transor Z. You turn on the voice modulator, and then and then you talk about the ops and the other thing, and then and where you flew somebody out to, like this formula that is very successful. Now maybe the whole world is just in a different place, and but it's a question that
Yeah.
itches me, right? That's like,
Well, here's the thing about that. I want to touch on that, if you would mind. I think, much like capitalism, right now, most people in America are not plant based. It doesn't take long, however, to find some variation of something talking about plant-based restaurants, right?
mm-hmm, mm-hmm.
In a capitalist society, in a hyper-capitalist society, we will find a way to segment, right? You'll actually find hyper segmentation, right? So there's the world of like the monoculture, because everyone is settled on the monoculture. again, I think it has really negative impacts for Black people going forward when we've accepted the monoculture.
Mm-hmm.
Except, especially a monoculture that we did not create. It's very similar to how when we build our brother Alyasha, it's not about what the streets want or people want. It's about what the industry wants and tells you is okay this year.
Yeah. Mm-hmm.
Now, you have people that break out to just kind of be like, hey, I do what I do. Hey, Drake's like, hey, I sing. I talk about getting hurt. I actually, and we've said this before, while I'm not the hugest fan of his music, I appreciate Drake because he is showing people that there is a world outside of America.
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
Like America doesn't determine what the hell happens with global music. And with Afro beats, right? With the S.
Oh yeah, that. I mean, I guess that's the other. That's the other lane, right? Like if you don't do you don't do the, at least it seems to be when I observe the younger people, it's like the other lane is I do the Afro beats. Like I'm over here.
Yeah, you do, which is like some. It's an amalgamation. I know that's usually a negative term, so I'm actually not using it in a negative way. It's, again, global music for the rest of the world, that then it's enough people in their power centers there and enough people in America who listen to it. So now it is identified as a power center in America.
Yeah. Yeah.
But has connections to Toronto, has connections to London, has connections to Paris, has connections to Lagos, has connections to, you know what I mean, all these other places, to Brussels, to Amsterdam, where it's like, yo, this is a global context outside of. Now, I was also in London when they told me about Russian trap and Russian drill music and Italian drill music, and showed me a video of Italians with all blue on doing music that sound like they did it in Chicago. I mean, we actually have, like, you figure drill itself has 3 origin cities. It has Chicago, it's actually the motherland, New York, and London. So again, and I think, what I take from what you said earlier, Just, is that, like, this stuff is happening, and I don't know if we're chronicling it appropriately at the speed of its existence. And then while we're trying to codify music for people to tour, right? We're codifying people touring, separating the music and the art and the culture from the people who are dealing with it. Now, listen, there's a lot of money being invested into the Bronx through this Universal Museum of Hip Hop. Shout out to Paradise Gray from X Clan, who's out here, who's deeply involved in that.
Mm-hmm.
So I actually like that. Why? Because we're not separating, because people are using this actually as an economic development driver.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, and making place.
There's
in the place where it comes from, at least, you know what I'm saying, that like that something actually lives there, right? Like something actually lives in the Bronx. It's not like you want to go learn about hip hop, you go to New York and go to the MoMA.
Right. Or like, okay, it's in the Bronx and people are using the economic and community development tools they have to build it out.
Mm-hmm. Oh, you muted, God.
And that's important.
Yeah.
So I think that's this thing. But there's another part of this that we have to talk about. What are the messages? And I'm not just talking about go listen to a Black Star album, right? Because sometimes people could be like, you want to hear real hip hop, you should go listen to Yasin Bey and to Alib Kweli, who did a record on Fox with Fox, Rupert Murdoch money, which is fine. Like, it's fine. Like, I listen to music that was created by motherfuckers selling drugs. So, like, okay, if I listen to some music created by Rupert Murdoch's money, okay, whatever, right? So, but I'm not talking about just that whole, like, if you want to hear real hip hop, go listen to this.
Yeah.
It's like, how does our interpretation of our music influence? And everyone knocked Wynton Marsalis when he did this, Good, Bad, or Ugly. Him and Stanley Crouch, and people knocked But now I get that why you have to have someone that waxes poetic about the nature of what this is
Mm-hmm.
and does not allow it to become just something, and it becomes just good songs that make you feel good and say, who would have thought that we would make it this far?
Yeah.
Like that narrative is insufficient. I use an example. Pittsburgh had the 50th anniversary, and shout out to the mayor of the city, Mayor Gainey and his team for trying to chronicle it, right? And I honor that. But then there's also like, what happened after Wiz Khalifa and Mac Miller, right? Like, what happened? And then the last guy was Jimmy Wapo from the Hill, and he unfortunately he died in some intercommunity warfare.
Mm. Yeah.
But like, you get 2 or 3 guys, and that's it. So we can talk about the 50th anniversary, but are children still creating art? Have the conditions changed? How are they connected to the monoculture now? And so these are the questions we have to ask, not as a challenge or trying to just hold someone accountable, because accountability without no relationship is religion. So it's not about just trying to hold someone accountable.
Yeah. Yeah.
But it's really saying, in relationship for our future, and specifically I'm saying our future as Black people, and our future as original people who are abiding by these ideas, until we get to the place where somebody can be like, you know what? I kind of do Afro beats and hip hop mix, and I don't really worry about the other stuff. We might get there soon.
Yeah.
But we have to have the dialogue in a way that actually tells the story, so that we don't do what happened to jazz, so that you and I had to go back and listen to jazz and study jazz and wait till Adrian Young and Ali Shaheed Muhammad, who did beats for Tribe, come out and part of his musicality and does Jazz Is Dead.
Right. Then like that like helps you accelerate connection. You know what I mean? You didn't have to, because I mean, I think of all the music that, I mean, and I tried, I did some very intentional child hip hop brainwashing. Like, hey, y'all gonna listen to this in the car. So you would know some of these songs and know some of this music, you know. But like, if you depending on if you're depending on the macro level of our American culture, it's gonna be, oh, Biggie, hip hop, Jay-Z, Snoop. You know what I'm saying? Like, it's gonna be, you know what I'm saying, Dr. Dre. I guess you get some NWA, you'll get, you're gonna get a copious amount. I guess then you might get Outkast, depending on who in the macro, right?
Yeah, you'll get Outkast. You're
you
not
get
gonna
that.
get what was that group they did? Your Mama's on Crack Rock. Remember that song? They come on, what's the name? Your mama's on crack rock. Now my mama.
Not right. You're not gonna.
You ain't gonna get that.
No, you're not gonna get that. You know what I'm saying? You're not even gonna get me. You might get Mix a Lot. You know what I'm saying? I mean, like, you know what I'm saying? Like, it'll be very like tied to how, quite frankly, the outward gaze experienced hip hop, not the inward gaze, which then is like is a problem there, right? Because then it's like our own narrative of our own experience gets lost. Now, the good, like I say, the good thing is, I mean, just because folks did all these events and been doing all this stuff this year, I mean, you can just keep saying, like, you could keep having things where you try to bring this world together, right? To retell these stories, to talk about these times, talk about the things that went on, in these different eras, even speaking to, and I say it on here just in case anybody from the city is listening. You know what I'm saying? It'd be nice if something you was related to or connected to, that you made sure that you got something out in the streets, because you suddenly see a sign, you're like, well, I know them. Oh yeah, I did. I got the equipment that got that show happened, or like you was a part of, and then you're not sure if you are a part of it, right? Like there's a legwork piece when you're doing creative work, and before I had confirmation, I was hating. I was like, "This is some bullshit. Who did this?" You know what I'm saying? And then it becomes a thing of you do creatively. I can imagine in different cities, like it could be really fresh to hear different cities tell the stories of the different artists and all the stuff that really is like it'll be lost to history because we didn't have, like, if you made music in the last 10 to 15 years, we can go find your stuff on SoundCloud or YouTube. Like if somebody wanted to like do a little like, yo, you ever heard of this artist? This is so and so. He was pretty dope. Then he like went to the army, decided to stop rapping, or like, on the positive, on the negative, something happened to him and they're no longer with us, due to some calamity. But anything before 2004, if somebody ain't copy it somewhere, you might not never, it wasn't easy to make mass recordings of all the different ways that you went and did things creatively. You know what I'm saying? Like everybody, video, audio recording, photography, all that was not as accessible as it is for everything post. Especially everything post the cell phone, like especially even we'll say the iPhone, like the modern, phone galaxies, you can do all this wild stuff with just this phone. So all things creative wise that we would associate with what one would do if you was a creative performer is different because you can't actually chronicle it in a way that you could not easily, and so like where is there an opportunity to talk about storytelling and documenting times and then cross-referencing again with the social political realities that were happening that also that was a part of why this creative response was going on. And so I would say to the world, enjoy the various videos of the 50th hip hop and go back and listen to some new music, but I also would encourage folks to like don't don't listen to Rolling Stones, whatever. I think they did an article like the greatest whatever. I mean, they always making silly ass lists of music. So I mean, generally don't get too caught up in Rolling Stones as an authority on these things. But like, you know,
if you're gonna listen to the Rolling Stone, check out Larry Jackson. And I share about him because he runs Gamma, which took money from, a lot of other people, but he was actually the program director for KMEL in the Bay at 17 years old.
Oh, wow.
Then he went to J Records, he went to Apple, he did the Beats deal with Dre and them.
Okay.
And then and so he left Apple a couple of years ago to do his own thing as an independent distributor. So he's working with Usher, Rick Ross, Snoop, all these guys. So if you want to watch that, don't go into how they make the determination that Outkast is the 7th best group or Eric B. and Rakim is the 13th best group. Like, how do you make that determination? Again, like Eric B. and Rakim had, two really good albums. And then it gets strict, then it gets, it's okay. And then by Don't Sweat the Technique, you got a couple songs. But you can't separate Rakim from being central for how other artists said they were going to do their music.
Yeah. Absolutely.
Right? Like, there's seminal artists, there's classic artists, and there's really good artists, right? Those are all different things.
Yeah.
So listen, I appreciate, Guy, you thinking about opening this conversation up because it's really a conversation about us. It's really a conversation about, like you said, memory and storytelling.
Mm-hmm.
What story that we're all aware? We always talk about how stories get told wrong. We always talk about how people didn't tell the story of Martin Luther King. Okay. Well, we weren't physically alive then. But are we going to let this happen with hip hop?
Right. Right. We're all there.
We're all there. Are we going to let the story being told like, oh man, it was all about peace and love and everybody just wanted to be together? Was it? Was it really? it was Money in Cars part of this very early. I listened to Lottie Dottie the other day, and he talked about, listen, it might as well have been a commercial. Slick Rick did that as a commercial.
Right.
So it wasn't always just about, was it always non-materialistic? Because that's not true. That's not rigorous. That's not historically accurate.
Mm-hmm.
And we got to stop acting like that.
Yeah. And if you can't, if you don't know how, or you don't feel comfortable talk about those other aspects of the narrative, then get more people involved so you can talk about it. Just you got to get more people involved. You can't just go through. I mean, or at least go ahead and do the thing you're gonna do, and some of us are gonna be like, "Hey, man, bro, fam, my man, sis, what you talking about? That was not how that happened."
It wasn't how it happened, man.
It would be like
we
if somebody
all love Lottie Dottie. Lottie Dottie is a wild song.
Right.
Lottie Dottie is a song about like a dude recognizing a woman, girl's too young.
Yeah. So, we have to engage with the rigorous engagement around where it is. I mean, I guess folks tell you about like how like the first, I think, versions of White Lines was not anti-cocaine. Like the later version you get to listen to is like, hey, yeah, don't do it. Like it was just like, nah, white lines, people doing them.
Because you can't separate it from the proliferation of drugs in post-industrial America.
Yep. And I would say in the macro culture, the comfortability with folks using coke in the 80s is talked about. I mean, and not saying us folks, I'm saying like other folks, like the rest of America. It's like startling. I'm like, oh, y'all just gonna be like, it's all cool. When it was happening in the 80s, y'all wanted to kick everybody out the NBA and destroy leagues, and you try to get bus drivers fired and stuff. But now, like, yeah, people was using coke, and you just move on. I'm like, all right. I mean, I'm glad that we got to a mental health place with this conversation, but it's still a bit it's challenging. It's challenging, to say the least, I guess. People hear people just be like, oh yeah. So. I don't know if we solved anything today, but hopefully...
we ain't solved shit. Listen, we ain't solved shit. What we did was we shine a light on an issue.
Yeah.
And there's space for people who shine the light. And we didn't necessarily say we had the solution. The point was we have to have the more rigorous conversation.
Yeah.
And not just when everyone wants to have the more rigorous conversation, not the 2-minute TikTok, but like, yo, what are we doing with our music? What are we talking about with us? And I will just say this in closing. There's also something connected to when young people and not so young people took their like sense of what they should do from the people next to them, not their phones.
Mm-hmm.
So what did it mean when the person that you saw wore the thing that you talked about versus the person that what you took from was watching someone else say that this was a style and then watching your friend do it? Not that they figured it out from somewhere, but they saw it on the internet. You saw them do it, but you don't see them. Kids don't go outside and play with each other. They talk to each other playing video games.
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
So the idea of even social norming about how they start to understand what is even different.
Yeah, we got to talk about
that. That's for another time.
Yeah, we got to come back and talk about that some more because there's a lot there. All right. Well, with that, you know what I'm saying? Let's say peace.
Peace.
Thank you for listening to Good Brothers. Thank you to my good brother, Majestic. Good Brothers is a part of the Ask Your Oldhead podcast, and you can support the podcast by rating and subscribing wherever you listen, sharing with others, and also you can become a patron. If you search Justice Rajee on Patreon, you can sign up to be a monthly contributor. You can also go to either Etsy and look for the Ask Your Old Head shop and buy one of those wares there, or you can go to AskYourOldHead.com. That's AskYourOldHead.com, and order a sweatshirt. There'll be things coming and changes arranging. I hope our discussion on hip hop at 50 was of some value to you or something that can be built upon. I imagine we will return to this topic at some time in the future. So in any event, stay cool out there if you're up here in the northern hemisphere. Stay somewhere in the middle. Actually, I guess some other places it's unseasonably hot, but stay comfortable wherever you're at. Take care of the ones you love. So with that, I say peace.